A font is the way you present the text, and in written communication, you have the words and you have the way those words are expressed. And I think that the expression of text through typography is just as important as tone of voice or body language or eye contact when you're talking to somebody in real life. For any company to not use that as an opportunity to say something about who we are, what we believe in, and how we see our relationship with the audience, with the customer, it would be a real missed opportunity. Nebula is a group of creators working together to kind of build our own house. We're a bunch of digital creators, mostly video creators, podcasters. For folks like us who do that, so much of our work, the home of our work, is owned by multi-trillion-dollar global technology conglomerates. We kind of felt like maybe we should have our own home that we control, where we get to decide which features get rolled out to the viewers, and how we present information, how we curate the collection of things that we put on there. So when we got together and decided, let's build our own platform, let's build our own streaming service, let's present ourselves to the world in a new way, we had to think a lot about what are we? What is Nebula? What are we really doing here? What is the brand identity of Nebula? The container itself has to be fairly blank. It should mean something, but it can't be too stylized or it starts to clash with the video thumbnails or the video that's on the screen. The most logical analogy for me was a museum. Same problem. You take a curated collection of things that other people have made, you present them to an audience in a way where they can enjoy those things, and they can understand the meaning of them, and they can go from one to the next, but the container itself doesn't interrupt negatively the flow of information or the conversation you're sort of having between the artist and the consumer of that art, the viewer of that art. It's mostly white walls with art on them and text. Thinking about museums and thinking about typography, instantly my mind goes to the Whitney Museum and Whitney, the font created for the Whitney Museum by Heffler and Company. Whitney was a natural choice for us. And then somewhere along the way, Heffler and Co. was bought by Monotype, and their approach to licensing is a little bit different. And the licensing costs of using Whitney just were no longer sustainable for us. And so we had to evaluate, does it make more sense for us to pay these licensing costs and stick with the branding that we've always had? Or does it make more sense for us to just go build something new, just start from scratch?
My name is Simon Buckmaster, and I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Nebula. I look after everything that's design related for the company, and that ranges from design for creators to design of the software, the brand design for the company. But type design is an entirely separate discipline, very technical discipline. I don't have the experience or skills to make a font from scratch. So creating a typeface from scratch for our needs was not really an option that we could explore. So we looked at a number of options for commercially available type that we could license. We found many options that were similar to the typeface we were currently using, but had small differences that meant that we couldn't just swap in the font without needing to readjust the metrics across all of our products and all of the brand work. But we also wanted to explore what our options were for open source typefaces, because they had the considerable advantage that we can customize them to be exactly what we need them to be, and something we could own moving forwards and use exactly as we needed to use. And so that's when we really started looking at open source, and specifically Source Sans, to see if there was an option where we could use that and adjust it to fit exactly the requirements we had.
My name is Paul Hunt. I'm a typeface designer at Adobe, and I created Source Sans. So in about 2012, Adobe started having more open source projects, and we needed an open source typeface family that could be shipped as part of these products. None of the existing fonts at that time really met our needs, so I was given the assignment to create Adobe's first open source typeface family. Open source is free for other people to use and remix and incorporate into their projects. It's a type of ethos where it can be seen as giving back and helping support other creators.
Let me show you some of the ways we customize Source Sans to respond to the challenges that we faced when trying to find a drop-in replacement for our font. So here there's an example of our UI This is our mobile UI in Whitney SSM. And I can show you what it looks like if we drop in the default version of Source. It looks like this. And so when I toggle between them, you can see that it's immediately apparent that something's changed. The video title that in Whitney takes 3 lines, in Source it drops down to 2 because the font is so much smaller by default and so much tighter spaced. If we want to scale it horizontally to match the width, we can do that, but we end up with something that is no longer the same weight because we've scaled the width of the strokes as part of scaling the overall character. So we've made it wider, but we've also made it bolder, and that's not what we want. So what we can do in glyphs using typography specific software is we're able to instead scale each character in a way that respects the widths of the strokes and doesn't distort them. We made some other small adjustments to some letters. What we did here was, this is the Source Sans lowercase t. Paul opted for a slant this way when designing this. One of the small adjustments we made was just to keep that straight and kind of restore a slanted top to that stroke for the Nebula Sans lowercase t. And then this is the ampersand we added. So again, Whitney has its distinctive ampersand. We wanted something a little bit less flashy than that for our purposes. This is the Source Sans one. It's an attractive ampersand, but it's kind of curvy, a little bit curvier than I was intending. And so we basically came up with something that was kind of a little bit more neutral and with some straighter lines for the ampersand for Nebula Sans. Here we can see the same amount of text with the same settings for Whitney, and for Source Sans, with the adjustments we made, looks almost identical in terms of the amount of space it takes, the amount of lines, the way it splits onto lines, and the visual weight of the 2 typefaces is very, very similar. Prior to Nebula Sans, we actually had to use a different font for the video player because that is one place where we are constantly changing numbers. Tabular lining figures are numbers that are fixed width. This is a feature that does exist in Whitney, but not in the version of Whitney that we were licensing. You can see that when numbers are counting in a typeface without tabular lining, you get these shifts, especially as you change from like a 1 to a 0. Everything moves around. To stop that from jumping around and to make for a pleasant user experience, we actually used a different font called Noto that had tabular lining figures. A lot of our users probably wouldn't notice that the font in the video player just for the numbers was a different font from the entire rest of the product. But I knew, and it drove me crazy. And so if we look at this same UI in Nebula Sans with tabular lining figures, you can see that as the numbers count up, everything stays fixed in place, nothing moves. We were able to use Nebula Sans in every part of the UI we needed to. We didn't have to fall back to a different typeface just for this one specific feature. So that's a brief overview of some of the changes we were able to make to Source Sans thanks to Paul's work and the open source license, and some of the ways we were able to customize it specifically to the constraints that we had for our brand and our product.
If you change a primary branding element, even if it's a subtle change, even if it's barely perceptible, that's still a change. And whether anyone notices or not, it should mean something. Paul had worked on pioneered gender-inclusive emoji. And because so many of the creators we work with, gender identity in some form or another is a component of their work, that just felt like such an easy, instant connection that obviously jumped out at us. We liked Source Sans the best as a starting point. And then starting to look into other things Paul had worked on and just who Paul is, it was a pretty clear, obvious fit just conceptually.
I was at a certain point one of Adobe's representatives to Unicode, and as part of that, I sat in on the emoji subcommittee meetings. The emoji system was starting to be scrutinized a bit more because it seemed that gender was starting to make its way into the emoji system in ways that were not helpful. So for example, all of the masculine coded emoji would be in active roles such as a policeman or a fireman, and all of the feminine coded emoji would be things that could be seen as more frivolous. So getting a haircut or getting nails painted. I decided to take it upon myself to write up a proposal that would advocate for more gender inclusive representation within emojis. So as part of that process, I did a lot of reading about gender, and I looked at it from as many angles as I could. And it was through that process of seeing all these different ways that I could identify that I realized this whole concept of masculinity is something that has been kind of expected of me from a very young age, but I don't have to make that a part of my identity if I don't want. I think that it became more clear to me that I maybe am not a gay man. I think that a lot of people might look at me and see that, and that's kind of my external gender presentation, but my gender identity is more non-binary. So I tried to distill all of the things that I learned in my proposal for making emoji more gender inclusive, and so now you can have all those options for all of the human formed emoji.
Paul is a great person to have as part of our brand identity going forward, because there's just so much connective tissue there. The spirit of inclusivity around gender identity, having that as like a core ethos behind the scenes of how a decision was made, that feels good. It feels like it echoes and represents how we see the world.
For the type of content that I like to watch that is a bit more queer, the creators have to sometimes jump through hoops to make sure that their videos don't get demonetized. And where with Nebula, they don't really have to worry about that so much because they're getting supported in other ways. When I think about typeface design and design in general, for me, it's about problem solving. Personally, I think what Simon has done is really great, and happy that I've been able to be a part of that in some way.
We made a bunch of changes to Source Sans to make Nebula Sans, but we got it for free. If those changes are useful for us, maybe they're useful for other people too. Maybe other people are running into one problem or another that looks like some of the problems that we had. And for those people, we say, go nuts. We got it for free. We did some work. Let's share it back out with the world. I think Paul, as much as any of our creators, is a creator. Typography is a creation. That is creative work. And the fact that Paul's other work is so emphasized on inclusivity and diversity and the way that connects with how we and our creators see the world, it just feels like a real convergence of ideology and ethos. And it just seemed like such a great opportunity to tell Paul's story, to tell a story about what we care about. We have a chance to tell our audience something about what we believe in. Why wouldn't we take it?